Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today with my guest, Tim Bigonia. As many of the listeners know, I was asked to put together a few episodes on grief, and when I was doing that, Tim, you quickly came to mind as I had been introduced to your work a few months ago by a mutual friend, Lorraine, and I was especially interested to bring you in and talk about some of these things based on the work you're doing as the creator and the host for the podcast Journey to Grateful, which offers stories of inspiration and insight around navigating the unfamiliar pathways of loss and learning to live life after loss, which ties directly into what I was hoping to target around for these topics. So first, let me say good afternoon and thank you for agreeing to do a show with me and have some good discussion.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you reaching out to me and the chance to speak to you and your listeners. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, these topics are difficult at best, right?
Yes.
Knowing that you're really focused in this space, I know you'll have some insight that you can add here. So before we get into some pointed questions, maybe you could share how you found yourself with this Journey to Grateful podcast. I'm sure you didn't just wake up. There's backstory. I know the backstory, but let's share the backstory with the rest.
Yeah, unfortunately, it comes from experience. My wife, back in 2017, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she went through all the treatments, the surgeries, and fought it very hard, worked full-time throughout the entire process, was at a point where we thought that perhaps it was taken care of. And unfortunately, there was an issue, cognitive issues that came about, and we discovered that it had metastasized into brain tumors. And she did end up losing her battle July of 2020. We have 3 kids, and I discovered after her loss that the idea of grief was so foreign to people. It was very mystical, and I wanted to demystify it for not only the people who are going through it, but for also the people who are helping others to support them going through grief. And with my experience with my wife, not only her loss pushed me into creating this podcast, but when she first was diagnosed and she was a few months into her treatment, she came to me and I actually misunderstood what she was talking about. She said, I need to find out why this happened to me. And I thought, she's thinking, why did I get cancer? And she said, no, you misunderstand. I need to do something with what I have. So she reached out to her doctors and she was able to speak to about 2 or 3 people that were coming after her into a similar diagnosis so that she could give them some guideposts and some ideas along their path that they were newly on. And I thought that was quite wonderful. So that is the impetus of Journey to Grateful. I am creating a community and this podcast to share my story and others' stories so that people who are new to their grief journey can understand a little bit of what is ahead of them. Not everything is going to be the same, but we can help guide and help those people through their journey. And then, of course, anybody who is trying to support somebody through grief, that they can better understand what that friend or family member is going through on their journey with grief.
So first, let me say I'm sorry that your family had to go through all that. Never easy, but I want to acknowledge all that you've been through.
Thank you.
And the great work that you're doing. A couple of things jump out at me when I heard your story, just as you were telling it, but also before. And I'm not sure I'll have the right words in the way I want to say it, but it strikes me that some of this was a gift to you.
Yes.
There were a couple gifts in there. So first of all is your wife had this amazing ability to put aside her own trauma, if you will, that she was going through
Mm-hmm.
and put others before her.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly brave, incredibly selfless, and try to make it be purposeful, if you will.
Yes.
You're continuing on with that. So kudos to you on that. But I also know there's a little bit of a additional backstory there, again, from listening and doing some research that I'd love you to share with the folks because, again, it's horrible for me to say it's a gift because it was a trauma to your wife. But from the way I understand it, what some of the things that she went through previously made her have an understanding and a willingness to talk to you about certain things that probably, I don't know, set you free or made you, I don't have the right words, so help me out, but I think you know where I'm going.
Yeah, completely understand. Yes, yes. Well, her backstory, which is extremely important to my story as well, is back in 1999, her first husband and her had a 9-month-old daughter, and at the time, it was July of 99, she lost her husband in a tragic accident, and he had epilepsy, so there was a contributing factor. So when you're talking about the gift, I think what you're referring to is something that I speak of often in the podcast, and that is her and I having many, many conversations in our relationship about how she went through her grief, how she made it. I even blatantly asked her, "How did you do it?" And she said, "I had no other choice. I had a 9-month-old daughter. I didn't have an option. My only option was to move forward and find a way to do so." So she unwittingly, through many, many conversations, gave me some insights to grief, gave me some insights to those steps to take to move forward. And surprisingly enough, prepared me for the journey that I'm currently on, which is ironic, yes, definitely a gift, because without those conversations, I don't know where I would be. And some of the conversations were very very minimal, very seemingly at the time insignificant. Others were quite significant, and I've held on to each and every one of them. One such was her and I talking about this vehicle that she had before her husband Rob passed, and it was a giant Ford Explorer. He wanted a very big, safe car for her and their daughter to go back and forth to wherever. She did not like it. She pretty much hated the vehicle because it was just too gigantic. So I happened to ask her, it must have been pretty difficult to get rid of that vehicle when it came time for you to make that decision. She said, "Oh, no, definitely not difficult. I hated that car." And I said, "Oh, interesting." She said, "You have to understand, there came a time when I had to realize that he was no longer here, and I needed to start making decisions that would benefit myself as well as our daughter." And at that point in time, it didn't matter perhaps what he would feel or think about me getting rid of that car, for instance. I had to do what was right for me. So those little insights have definitely helped me.
So I hadn't thought about it before, but I hear in that message the permission to go on living. To your point, the point of your subtitle
Absolutely.
there is like, it's there, it's alluded to, but it's probably one of the biggest challenges that people face is that they're still stuck in thinking that, they had to do it a certain way or everything that they had done for, X amount of years was with this person in this way and trying to separate their thinking from that. That's got to be difficult.
It's a very important mindset to try to shift yourself into because it isn't very easy. It doesn't come as second nature. You are constantly thinking about that person that you've lost. And if they were somebody who was an every single day, every moment of your day person in your life, you are constantly comparing to life when they were here to life when they are not here. Every decision that you make has this secondary thought, well, what would Colleen want? What would Colleen have done? And yeah, there are certainly moments when that is a valid question and that you can actually take that into consideration, but there are some others that you just can't you can't take that time to consider what they would want or what they would do because they're not in this situation. Only you are, and you need to have the confidence to understand and know what is right. Her giving me permission happened on so many different levels to move forward. And certainly the most important was her doing it by example herself. If she wasn't willing to take her story, which had appeared as though it ended when she lost Rob, if she wasn't willing to turn the page and to start a brand new chapter for herself as well as for her daughter, her and I would have never met, and we would have never had the wonderful 16 plus years and a wonderful family. We now have two additional boys, and there's so much that she would not have experienced if she wouldn't have given herself permission to move forward.
Do you have any advice for people based on your own experience or from what you've heard from others on if they aren't in that place yet, if they aren't finding the way to give themselves permission to move beyond the immediate grief? Does anything jump out at you as a first step or something that can be actionable that could help people move forward toward that?
Before I get into something that is actionable, I need everybody to understand that this journey and everybody's experience on this journey is absolutely independent from anybody else's. So the bottom line here is that you have to understand that if somebody that you know had a similar experience and they are at this point in their grief, that does not mean that you are going to also find yourself at the same point in the same number of months, perhaps. Everybody is going to be completely different. To actually take a step forward and to think about moving forward, you definitely need to have the right mindset. You have to also give yourself permission. You have to allow yourself grace. I know for a fact that my wife wants us as a family to move forward. I had the huge benefit to have that discussion with her. She actually, on one of our very last drives to the doctor, shocked me and turned down the radio and said, "You need to date. I want you to." And I looked at her and I said, no, I'm good. Don't worry about that. And she said, "No, you have to understand that I didn't have that chance to know that from Rob, and I need you to know that." So you need to, hopefully everybody out there knows their significant someone really, really well. You're not going to always have a chance or want the chance to have that type of a discussion with them, but deep inside, you know what their wish is for you. So if you're going to try to take on that giant task to consider moving forward and taking steps to move forward, you need to just do one step at a time. That is the best advice that I can give you. You're not doing it on anybody else's timetable except for your timetable. You take the smallest little step, you take a slightly larger stride, whatever is comfortable for you. You need to definitely find a way to at least take one step forward and then find a way to take another step forward. And whatever that means to you is going to be completely different than whatever that means to me, and so on. So, for some people, taking a step forward might be going through their loved one's clothes and starting that particular task. Perhaps it could be painting a room in the house. Perhaps it is taking charge of something you can control in your life, because oftentimes when we have experienced this loss, we feel so out of control because that control was completely stripped from us. So if you can find something to control yourself, then by all means, take that as your first step.
I love that advice. I wouldn't have thought about just sort of any unrelated thing, but something that you can control, and just talk to yourself about the fact that you're going to do this thing, you're in control of this thing, you have the capability to do this thing. It sort of gives you that confidence that you can control some piece of your life a little at a time as a step up.
Yeah, because confidence is something that you also lose once you lose a loved one. You don't feel confident about so much in life. So if you can provide yourself a slice of strength, some confidence, put that back in your life because you've controlled it and made that happen yourself, that's going to go a long way. Again, the mind is a very large piece of this particular puzzle. There's a lot that goes on in your mind once you lose somebody. So you have a lot of demons in there. I think our own thoughts are our worst enemies.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, we do a lot of work in that space, and it's not typically related to grief, but learning to sort of catch the thoughts, the negative thoughts anyway, right in the moment, and catch those limiting beliefs, and catch any of the, I'm sure the woulda, coulda, shoulda train is probably there very often, right?
Constantly.
Right. And you can't, there's zero value ever in being able to go on that train, because you can't resolve any of those thoughts.
No, you can't. It is one that is on a constant loop. And, when it comes to my specific, very particular experience, I know that Colleen and I both went down every possible avenue for her treatment and for the end result to be as positive as we possibly could have before there was nothing left for us to do. And I'm confident that we did everything that we could do. So that, because we were very proactive, she was a strong woman. She would not back down from anything, and she would face things. Obviously, she, turned down the radio in the car that day and faced a very difficult conversation. That's the type of personality she was. She didn't bury her head in the sand, and she didn't pretend something wasn't there that was. That was huge. So yeah, you cannot woulda, shoulda, coulda. It's never going to get you anywhere.
Yeah. So my thought is it goes along with just our typical thoughts around that. And that is to create the ability to catch yourself, take a pause, redirect your thoughts, because it's going to keep happening. We never can stop it really, but just learning how to move away from it and not buy into the thoughts. There's two things that I know you say that I wanted to add to your comment about everybody's grief looking and feeling different, and the timelines looking and feeling different. So I had a couple of notes that I picked up on from some of your stuff. And one of them was, well, I'll say them both. One of them is, don't get caught up in other people's beliefs. I think that's huge. And then the other one was around that it's a tangled ball of string, the feelings that go around grief.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they're both so important because, well, the tangled ball, I think for me is a good visual, and it's sort of like you can't get to the center of it. You got to unravel it. And there's all kinds of mismatched strings in there, in my ball anyway, that I'm thinking about, right? So I think it's a good visual. And that don't get caught up in other people's beliefs. Again, what I've heard you say, and I hadn't given it much thought, but it's true that people may have the best intentions, but they're probably given feedback and advice and thoughts on when you should do this or feel that.
Yeah, definitely. That both of those pieces are really large part of what grief is, and oftentimes you're not aware of it, and people don't talk about it enough, and I think that they definitely should. More times than not, keep in mind that those people out there that are giving you advice are doing it from the best place that they possibly can be. They are not doing it out of a negative space in their heart. They're trying to help you. They believe that they are truly trying to help you. And oftentimes it doesn't come off that way. And when it comes to, avoiding others' beliefs as to where you should be in grief, it comes around because, as I said before, grief is completely different for everybody. And although I have a bereavement group and we have, sometimes 20, 25 people in our group at one time, and we're sharing our stories and our experiences, everybody's story and everybody's experience is completely different. There might be some similarities. There might be some cautionary tales. But when you get to that point where perhaps somebody had a story last week and all of a sudden you're experiencing something somewhat similar, it's never going to be exactly the same. And that goes hand in hand with everybody's belief. There's so much that is complicated about this. People's beliefs when it comes to grief is usually coming from their experience or lack thereof. And the lack thereof is probably the most difficult suggestions to try to weed through, because people who have not gone through any of this might be using something from decades ago. I remember when I was a child and I had somebody close to me pass, like my grandfather. In my head, it was like a 2-week period when family and friends gathered. People came from out of town. You met cousins you never knew you had. Lots of food, lots of stories, and then life went back to normal after 2 weeks. Yeah, depending upon how many circles, how many rings outside of the center of that grief and that loss you are, that may be true. But when you are closer to that person, nothing is ever normal again. And now you're dealing with a life that is completely abnormal, and you're trying to wade through the muck that you find yourself in. Meanwhile, it appears as though everybody outside the window has gone back to life as normal. And you need to try to push yourself in that direction. And I get that. But there are going to be those people that believe and come to you. Maybe it's a month, maybe it's 6 months later, and just simply ask you a very mundane question about, hey, why didn't you fill in the blank? Might be, why didn't you come out when so and so invited you out to gather with a bunch of us? They're not looking to hurt you. They're just simply trying to help you along that path the best way that they can. Now, some people believe that within 6 months, you should have gone through your loved one's closed. Some people believe within a year, well, your grief must be over now. And that is the one that is the hardest for me to really swallow. The idea that grief has an end, as if the love that I felt for my wife had an end. It doesn't, it didn't, it won't ever. So why would my grief end? Because grief is simply love with no place to go. That is all that is. And it's always going to be there. So people that have those thoughts and have those beliefs, they may try to put those beliefs upon you, but you need to take that with a grain of salt. You need to calmly think them, perhaps straighten them out a little bit. That's your choice. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. One thing that was really interesting to me, it was probably a month and a half after the loss of my wife, and we were visiting with somebody who came over and said, hey, I'm going to bring you guys some fast food. We're going to sit out on the patio because it was still around the COVID area, and we'll just chat for a while and then I'll take off. And I thought that was excellent because he really went out of his way to just make sure that he could spend some time with us. And me and my two boys, and at the time they were 12 and 13, we sat around, we talked with him, we brought up my wife in conversation. We had a very good visit, and then he left. He emailed me a couple of days later. He said, it was so good to see you guys. And he said something in the email that was very interesting. He said, it was so refreshing to hear you talk of Colleen and how freely you and the boys spoke of her. And that is one particular detail about grief that I really want people to understand. Say their name. Many people may feel that they don't want to say the name because they don't want to be the one to remind you of their loss. And I apologize for being so blunt, but you're not going to be the one that reminds me today that I lost my wife. You're not going to be the one that reminds anybody that they lost their child or their sister or their parent. Every day we wake up and every day we go to bed, we know this, we remember this. You're not going to be the one. And in fact, I want everybody to understand that the stories that we tell about our loved ones that are no longer here are the only stories that will ever exist. So let's please share those freely and make sure that their story doesn't end. It can't continue the way that it should, but let's make sure that it just doesn't end. Now, you do refer to the ball of string, so I'm going to talk about that for a brief moment. I tend to look at the ball of string as the appropriate way to look at the timeline of grief. Some people, and again, this goes back to people's beliefs. Some people believe that the timeline of grief is a nice, straight, consistent line, that there's certain things that happen at certain points on that line. It doesn't exist. I've never experienced this beautiful, perfect little line. To me, it's definitely more of a tangled ball of string. And I love how you also interjected that there's different types of string in this ball, and it is tangled. And when I'm thinking about being on the timeline of grief, I might experience one thing this week, and I might mistakenly think to myself, oh my gosh, that was really rough. I'm so glad that that's done, thinking that I'm on this linear path and that once I get through something, I will never have to experience it again. And unfortunately, we're back to the tangled ball of string, and it could be a day later, it could be a week later, it could be a month later, something comes up, that ball of string wraps around another piece that you had already thought you will never experience again, and boom, you cross that point, and once again, you have the same feelings, a similar experience. There was somebody in my bereavement group that coined the phrase grief bombs. These are sudden, emotional, devastational outbursts, perhaps, that just kind of come up to you and slap you upside the head. And it could be at home, could be in the car. One time when a very good friend of my wife's had passed unexpectedly, she and her husband had moved to Belgium, and they actually had us over. So that was a wonderful trip for our family. We were able to go to Europe. We stayed in Belgium. She was a perfect hostess. She just spoiled us immensely. And she passed, I think it was within a year after we returned. And once the funeral and everything was over, I was back to work. I went to lunch across the street to a grocery store, happened to go down an aisle, turn a corner, and there was a display of Belgian waffles. And the tears were streaming down my face, and I just didn't know what the heck happened. Yeah, I did know what happened, but that would be the definition of a grief bomb. So understand that the experiences that you will have on this journey with grief can happen more than once because it's not a linear path. It is definitely not organized. It's not consistent. It cannot be expected. You can prepare yourself for some things. Milestones, I would suggest that you can prepare yourself for, but those everyday kind of unexpected things, the smells that you smell, a item in the grocery store, you pass by a place that you hadn't passed by in a long time, the list goes on and on. So those are the types of things that I want people to be aware of so that they can, at the very least, not be as surprised about it when it does happen.
And give themselves grace, right?
Amen.
When I think about
Yes.
that, yeah, when I think about going through that and getting hit in the grocery store and crying out of nowhere, not really out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
giving yourself the grace versus beating up on yourself and saying, gosh, it's been 6 months or a year or whatever that number is. Who cares? Who cares?
The
It's
number
still there,
doesn't
right?
exist. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other thing that you said, which I loved, was the advice to share stories, bring up the name, because honestly, I do think that many of us like sort of walk that line and debate that in our own heads. Like, is that the
Hmm.
right thing to do? Or
Hmm.
not
Definitely.
that I guess I've never thought, well, will I remind them? But I do think I've thought, will I make them sad? Like, we're having a great time. This is
Of
a good
course.
day. If I
Of
bring up
course.
so and so, is it going to make them sad and have them go to that place? But I love how you put it because they're always in their head in that space at some little corner of their,
Hmm.
your thoughts. So I love that feedback. I want to tie that into a segment you did on visiting some of the places that you used to go together and doing some of the things that you used to do together with that person. And I know, we'll preface it by saying everybody's different and it may work for some and not for others.
Of
But
course.
I loved
Of
the
course.
story that you shared around something big that you did. And I'll let you tell the story. But I think, again, it gives the person grieving permission
Hmm.
to keep enjoying the things that they enjoyed
Hmm.
and to be close to the memories.
Yes, definitely.
I'm sure there's pain in that too, but if you can sort of transition it, I would imagine, to a positive experience in a positive place of remembrance, it can be joyful. And I think that's what you guys experienced. Do you want to share a little bit about? I think you know what I'm alluding to.
Sure, sure. I love how you said that. You're taking grief, you're taking something that's sad, and it always will be sad, but you're trying to pull something else from that. And if it's a memory, that memory can either be very, very sad because it is a wonderful memory that can never happen again, or it can be wonderful. It can be phenomenal because it is all about the mindset and the way that you approach that memory. Be thankful that it happened and don't be sad that it's gone. That is a huge mindset shift. The specific detail that you're speaking of is a couple of months after the passing of my wife. Um, one thing that I need to add in here is that her husband, Rob, passed away on July 4th of 1999. And my wife, Colleen, passed on July 3rd of 2020. So July 4th holiday has never been our favorite. And in fact, I'll add one more. My mother in 2006 passed on July 4th. So, yeah, pretty much July 4th sucks for us. So, my daughter came to me a couple months after and said, you know what? I don't want to be here for next July 4th. And I said, excellent. I completely agree. And anybody who knows me, anybody who knows my family, knows that we are huge Disney fans, and we are DVC members down in Florida. So Disney World is our happy place. And what we decided is to take about a week and go down to Disney and celebrate our memories and celebrate Colleen and be in a place of good memories and understanding and walking in with our eyes open that there were going to be sad times, but there were also going to be wonderful times. There were going to be a lot of memories that we bring up and that we relive because we are there. And in fact, to take that even one more step further, in 2004, after we had been dating for 11 months, Colleen and I decided to take our daughter to Disney World, and we were still dating at the time. And these two females in my life, that 6-year-old little girl and this wonderful mother of hers, completely changed my life. And on that particular trip, I decided to completely change their life. So in Disney World, on the white sand beach of the Contemporary Resort, I took a knee on a moonlit, warm, summer feeling Florida night, and I proposed to her. And so there's just tons and tons of memories down there. We've averaged maybe every other year going down to Disney. So for us to take this leap and to do that trip made all the sense in the world. And I think that what I really bring to the table when I talk about this is for people to understand that, first of all, those happy memories and those happy places that you've been still can be happy. And it's completely the way that you take that and decide to digest it. And I would strongly suggest that you try to face those. There's definitely going to be tears. There's definitely going to be sad times. But keep in mind that I think that it's much more important and the feelings are much stronger of all the good things that you've experienced at your happy place, wherever that is. I don't care if it's a summer house that you used to go to, if it's a trip like Disney, if you ran out to the mountains in Colorado and you ski as a family. Keep doing those things. Do them for yourself, do them for your memories, do them for your lost loved one. I don't think that it's very wise to avoid those. But then again, you have to understand only you can make those decisions. So I can tell you what has worked for us, and I would definitely at least try it because there's some good times and there's some really warm feelings that you can grab from those happy places.
You just brought tears to my eyes because I didn't know the whole story on what I listened to. You didn't tell me about the proposal, I don't think.
Sorry.
So that's even better. Well, but it's even better, right? Your point is even more vivid because your memories obviously were so strong in that place. And
yes,
to be able to go back and visit them. And I actually get this on a way smaller scale, but my mother-in-law passed many years ago now, but we were very, very, very close. And the one place that we shared a lot together was cooking for holidays.
Oh, excellent.
She was a huge cook and we always cooked.
Yes.
And she was like on my shoulder, like always giving me like early on the confidence to like host for big, right?
Uh-huh.
So every holiday, it's one of the times I feel the closest to her because when I whip out the old cookbook with the old recipes for everything, I swear to you, she's in that kitchen with me.
Absolutely.
And people like, it's a joke around here because I feel like she's with me the whole day when I'm cooking. And I can relate to that, your ability to, again, yes, there are, I'm sure, was crazy sadness moments there too, but the ability to try to turn it and hold on to that happy memory. I commend you on that.
Thank you.
That's brave. And I feel like it was probably really healing for the kids.
It was wonderful. We all walked away knowing that was definitely the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And to your story about the cooking with your mother-in-law, I can't imagine because you not only have the feelings of doing that physical activity, but you have the smells as well. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Because, smell is like the strongest memory holding item in your senses. And, you must have just been fulfilled. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That is so.
I was just going to say, and a lot of the recipes that I'm making were her recipes, right? So again, another joke with us is she had cancer as well. And at the end, it was very quick. And she was somebody that didn't cook with recipes. It was all in her head.
Well, of course.
So I literally gave her cookbooks that had the, writing cards. And I'm like, you have to get these written out for me. Like we do. Yep. So I have some, but they're missing little things in them, but I cooked with her many times, so I knew how to fill in the blanks. Yeah. So, the memories.
Wonderful
there, so
story.
That's great.
Love it.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up one main thing before we get ready to close, but we focused a lot about obviously death of a loved one. Because obviously those are the biggest losses of magnitude, right? But I think it's worth acknowledging. I know you agree. I think you agree with this. Everybody else I've talked to in this space agrees. And I think it's worth saying out loud so people continue to hear it. We can also experience grief outside of a loss of a loved one. So we can grieve a relationship, a job loss, really anything we thought we were going to have that's no longer there. Yeah. And I think there's similarities in sort of all the pieces that you go through. Again, I'm not trying to compare them. There's no comparison. But I think it's okay for people to understand that they too can have some of those feelings when they're going through a divorce, for
Hmm.
example. So I think there's a lot of similarities. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. And I think that's where the key is that you have to understand that you are going through grief. No matter what your thought process is on, oh, that's ridiculous. This is nothing like death. Well, grief is not reserved only for death.
Mm.
Grief is the loss of anything. So you very aptly put it, grieving over the loss of a house, grieving over the loss of a job, that can be very serious, especially if it was something that you really looked forward to and you worked hard to try to achieve. I mean, that's really what any bit of loss is about. Any bit of grief is about that loss of something that you either had or something that you worked really, really hard to get and have. So, absolutely. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we don't acknowledge that you can still feel the same feels of grief with the loss of something like a job or a divorce, just like a loss of a loved one and the loss of a life. So we need to, back to what you said earlier, provide ourselves some grace, give ourselves the okay to go through that grieving process. There might be the 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 same feelings. They might be less intense, but that does not make them any less real. So it doesn't really matter the level of which that grief is that you felt or the level, perceived level of that loss is for anybody else. It only matters to yourself. And you need to understand that maybe what you're feeling are those feelings of grief, that you have to process those the same way that you process them if you are doing it in a traditional grief sense, which is kind of silly to think about, but it definitely is the same. So I absolutely agree. Definitely.
Well, I just want to thank you again for taking the time with me today. And we will put all the information about how to get in touch with you and your podcast in the show notes so people can look you up if they haven't already. You mentioned that you have a bereavement group. Is there anything you want to mention about that to put out there for people? I'm not sure how often it runs or if it's open all the time. Anything you can share there?
My bereavement group is local to my community, and I'm in southeastern Wisconsin, but it brings up a good point. Find people to talk to, no matter who they are. Now, that could be family or and it could be friends. I really find it very beneficial to talk with people who have experienced something similar. And it, again, we've talked about this and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Doesn't have to be exactly the same loss, but loss of any sort can be just reaffirming, reaffirming that what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and what you're thinking is not an odd thing. Having those people that share an experience, a story, and then you suddenly go, hey, wait, hold it. I just felt that last week. And then they're talking about something that I haven't experienced. Maybe that's coming in the weeks ahead. Absolutely. You can learn so much from speaking about your grief and by hearing about other people's grief. It is priceless and it gives you the ability to understand what potentially is on the horizon for you. And then, even more importantly, what potentially you could do to help yourself through those moments a little bit easier.
And I would guess in today's day and age, there are groups both locally as well as virtually. I haven't personally looked that up, but I
Yeah,
would bet,
I
yeah,
think so.
good information.
I totally agree.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, with Journey to Grateful, I've been toying with the idea of having something like that, finding out if people would be interested in even a Zoom call. It certainly could be as simple as that, and making sure that there is a way for somebody who does not have the ability or has not found the right group to experience one and see if that's the right fit for them. because talking is such a priceless commodity, and sharing your stories and sharing your experiences and understanding you are not alone is it's priceless. It is definitely priceless. So find a way to do that. Find a way to find somebody that you can talk to.
My 2 cents on that would be there's a place for it because and I think that for many people, it's easier to connect virtually than to get themselves out of the house and go find a local
Yeah.
place. And
Yep.
so I could see, thank gosh, I'm not going through anything like that right now, but I could definitely see how that would be more palatable to me if I was going through something and instead of walking into a room of strangers. I think you need a little less
Sure.
confidence to
Yeah.
dial into that virtual call, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, everybody's personality is completely
Yeah.
different. Some people might be okay with walking into a room that they don't know anybody. Other people, that is a huge brick
Yeah.
wall. And if they can do it on this in a safe
Yeah.
distance, so to
Yeah.
speak, on Zoom, oh, completely. I think that would be absolutely perfect. And to do it in such a way where, okay, I'm going to try this and understand that you don't have to do it again if you don't
Yeah.
want to, giving them the freedom and the control
Yes.
to be able to choose. That would be
Yeah.
huge. So that's something I'm seriously considering. I think in the future that will probably happen. I did have the ability to create. I went out on a limb at the beginning of this year, and I created a retreat. And I had 6 people that came to it, and it was wonderful. It was a 1 day in-person retreat, and I had a couple of people that came to speak. I also did some speaking, and we freely shared back and forth experiences, no matter if they were a speaker at the retreat or if it was somebody who came to the retreat to hear what was going on. It was a give and take throughout the entire thing. So that experience has definitely shown me that people make a difference. People matter. And hearing and listening to somebody is just as important as you sharing your story as well. So find a way to do that. It'll help.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been really great.
Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. This was wonderful.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.